White-tailed deer are one of the more commonly hunted animals in North America. Imagine going out on the weekend during hunting season, as you often do. You're looking for a big old buck, but what you see down your sights is not a deer at all. And somehow, despite the distance, the creature you see is looking right back at you. These are 5 allegedly real hunting stories about strange and terrifying creatures encountered by hunters. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. Tell us your creepy Halloween stories, or simply share a terrifying experience of any kind you might have. Now, let's begin. Stalked in the Swamp, from Zachary L. I've always loved being outdoors and being in the wilderness, but I'm a bit new to being a hunter. This particular encounter happened during late deer season, so around late December. The reason I got into hunting recently was because of my dad. He really wanted me to get into it. He thought bagging my own deer was a great rite of passage for a young man. Plus, I've been curious about it for a while. He talked with a friend of his who had a reasonable amount of land. He got permission for me to hunt on his land. We spent the next few days scouting the land, finding hotspots of animal activity, making sure we had the best spots for where we'd like to hunt. We found a few places and set up some tree stands, blinds, the whole 9 yards. One of those spots was a blind all the way at the end of his property in the swamp. The only problem is, during that time while we were surveilling the area, we would come across large dog-like footprints and would get the occasional flash of something running on 4 legs away from us when one of us would step on a twig or branch. So one night, I decided I would get up early and go ahead to the blind. I woke up at around 2 a.m. and made the drive there. I arrived by 3 a.m. by myself. My dad had to work the next day. I made it out there, got my gear ready, and sprayed some no-scent smell on me, along with some deer urine on my drag, so I smelt like a deer coming through. I was armed with a Mossberg 500 and a small headlamp. Now that I was prepared, I headed out into the forest. Now, I don't know about y'all, but there's something spooky about walking in the woods in complete darkness, especially alone. I was slowly making my way to the blind. I must have been 100 yards out, give or take. That's when I began to hear this howl. So I stopped for a moment and I began to listen. The sound sent chills down my spine, made me feel helpless. It was a chilling reminder that I was out here in the swamp alone. Then the darkness felt even darker. I put my shotgun off of safety and I sat there for a while. All of a sudden, I hear something running quickly. So I turned my headlamp on and aimed towards the sound. Immediately, the sound stops. I could barely see something just as it began to run off. It appeared to be some sort of large canine. I swallow hard and I wait a few more minutes. Then I begin to walk to the blind once more. Soon enough, I make it there. I sit down inside the blind, taking off my drag and zipping up the blind from the inside. A few minutes later, I hear something scratching at the door of my blind. This startles me, so I look over. I'm horrified. Whatever's outside is pressing its entire body and face into the blind. It's no longer scratching at it, so much as it is desperately trying to chew its way through, trying to get to me. I can hear growling and snarling, the gnashing of teeth. I literally jump up, grabbing my shotgun and pointing it at the door. I stopped and shouted, and then the thing ran away. I got a real good look at it too. I honestly thought it was a wolf, but it was just a coyote. The biggest freaking coyote I'd ever seen in my life, and despite its size, I could see its ribs quite well. The thing was starving. A chill went down my spine. That starving coyote was so desperate, it was hunting me. And coyotes, of all things, stay away from people. It took me a while to gather the courage to leave that blind, because as soon as I did, I knew that thing may be hunting me again. I reminded myself I had a shotgun, but what if it took me by surprise? I sighed, and then I left the blind, my ears on high alert. I kept the shotgun off of safety, and I held it at the ready, aiming as I looked around. My heart was pounding so hard that it was shaking the tips of my fingers, or maybe that was just panic. I walked as quickly as I could, while trying to also be quiet and steady with the gun. Thankfully, I managed to make it back to my vehicle without a problem. If I had to guess why it didn't come back, despite it being desperate, I think that coyote was battling with itself. On one hand, it was scared of me, but on the other hand, it was desperately hungry. And luckily for both of us, its ravenous appetite did not win out. Then again, was it really a coyote? Because I swear, it was larger than a wolf. The next time I go hunting out there, I'll keep an eye out for some especially hungry and large canines. Clemson County Creature, from Lucian Wulfhardt. My story begins on a cool autumn morning in mid-October in a small but quaint town near Clemson County, where the Tugelo River stands. My friends L and J and I went up to the mountainous region to enjoy a weekend full of camping. What we planned to do, aside from lodging and camping in a rustic cabin, was to hike the vast trails and rugged terrain, and to hunt for our meals, finishing the day off sleeping under the stars. This trip had been planned in advance, and as such, all of us thought we had everything covered, every contingency prepared for. But as we'd soon discover, we were horrifically wrong in that assumption. Our first morning in the mountains was met with a beautiful sunrise, the likes of which I doubt any of us had ever seen before. The light was warm and relaxing. Groggily, I got out of bed, still exhausted from the night before, as I was the one who drove for the last half of the trip. After waking up a little more, I got dressed, headed downstairs to meet the rest of my group, L and J. As we gathered together and sat down for breakfast, we began to discuss the first thing we'd do today. Every so often I'd tease them in hopes that one of them would drive next. But my attempts at persuasion failed, and I ended up being the driver for the day. We got ready and loaded into the vehicle, trekking into the wilderness for a day of hiking and hunting. I was up front driving and they were in the back seat. I decided to get back at them by swerving on a winding incline. I laughed, but someone slapped me in the back of the head. "Come on, dude. Are you going to be that dumb through the whole trip?" I chuckled. It was L. Calm down. I'm just horsing around. If I'm going to drive, I want to have some fun too. Whatever, L said. Just don't do that again. I nearly soiled myself. We eventually reached our destination. The fallen leaves decorated the forest floor, which crisply crunched underfoot as we made our way further into the hiking trail. It was really peaceful out here. Sometimes the wind would die down, and it would be nothing but silence and beauty, which would soon end when Jay began to whistle, usually Take Me Home Country Roads. And being as catchy as it was, we couldn't resist the urge to sing along. The hunting part of our hike was obviously destined to fail. The day went by fast, and before we knew it, the moon began to rise, and with it came the nightlife. The moonlight was pale and eerie, creeping through the brambles and thickets of branches above us, sending chills down our backs as the air grew cold. L began to cling to Jay, obviously creeped out, saying, "Maybe we should get going. Call it a night." Now, L's my best friend, and in the time we've known each other, whenever either of us gets a bad feeling, we'd take heed and turn away from the supposed risk. I nodded, and just as we began to head back in the direction of the car, a shrill cry rang out, a deafening and blood-chilling wail that snatched away whatever peace and tranquility was left in the night. We all stood frozen. "The hell was that?" Jay asked, L grabbing onto him tighter. "Did you hear that?" I began to scan the area around us, trying to make out anything in the dim moonlight. My ears twitched at every sound I heard, but I soon fixated on something in the distance. I squinted my eyes. It appeared to be two glowing, whitish yellow orbs. They were in a nearby tree. As quickly as I saw them, the orbs vanished, and that horrific wail resounded in the air, leaving us motionless from fear again. Courage or stupidity took hold of us, and we booked it back to the car. Whatever it was, running from it may be a bad idea, but staying there was certainly not an option. We made it back to the car, Jay and L getting in first. I jumped into the driver's seat and started it. As soon as the headlights flicked on, there in the brush in front of us, just barely visible, was a horrific visage. The creature I saw was sickly and had pale yellow eyes. I knew it knew we were scared, and it seemed to take pride in that. Its skin was a reddened color, like a tanned hide, only darker, while its face, from what little we could see, was sharp and angular. On the tree next to it lay one of its grotesque hands, just as monstrous as the rest of it, adorned with claws at the tips of its curled, elongated fingers. One leg was partially visible, and it was, much to our dismay, bent and misshapen. That's when we knew if this was a prank, it was the best darned prank ever, as no human leg is able to bend like that. Imagine how a dog's legs would be, or some other canine, with the knees bent backwards, heels resting off the ground. All the while as the pads of its feet lay nestled on the forest floor, its sharp claws dug into the dirt and leaves beneath it. Then the creature cracked what appeared to be a smile, revealing rows of sharp and gnarled teeth and fangs. All of this, as drawn out as it seems, happened in the span of a minute or two. Just as quickly as we saw it, it slithered away back into the brush. What was that? I asked, fear stinging my throat and tears burning my eyes. L and J were yelling at me to drive. I snapped back into reality, throwing the car into reverse and turning around, gunning it down the path. To hell if the road was narrow. We were getting out of there as fast as we could. After what felt like an anxiety-ridden eternity, we finally arrived back at the cabin and slowly made our way inside. Not because we weren't in a hurry, but because we were shocked and exhausted. We all decided to sleep in the same room that night, huddled around one another, cold and pale as the grave. L was passed out from the excitement of it all, while Jay was soon to follow from a rundown of his adrenaline-driven high. But I myself stayed awake for a while longer, clutching a hunting knife and wondering if I should grab a gun instead. I tossed and turned, alert at every sound that came from the woods, unable to get any decent sleep for what seemed like hours, until I finally gave up on the idea of a well-rested night. Screw it, I gave a defeated sigh. I'm not gonna sleep. I went downstairs for a drink and a bite to eat, still on edge as my heart pounded in my chest. There I sat in the kitchen, eating my midnight snack, drinking away whatever that thing was from my memory. All of a sudden, as if on a dreadful cue, a chill ran down my back. It was the same chill I felt right before that creature showed up, a feeling of a lurking nearby danger. A light tapping sounded at the window, and without thinking, I turned to look. In the darkness, 2 whitish yellow eyes shone from outside, beaming into the cabin as whatever they belonged to searched around. Then they rose higher into the air, resting almost above the window frame. This creature was tall, frightfully so. It put its hand on the window, but in the moonlight it looked wet and redder than it did before. A fresh, viscous substance dripped from its claws. Slowly I backed away, and it neared closer and closer to the door. Seeing that the door was unlocked, I bolted for it and slammed up against it as it creaked, knocking whatever that hideous thing was away. I locked the door. I heard a slight grunt and what sounded like a growl, but then came a different sound, a familiar one. "Let me in, Lucian." It was L's voice from behind the door. "There's a monster out here. Please don't let it get me." Her voice deepened and became more sinister in tone. I stood there, knife in hand, tears welling in my eyes, a gasp in my throat. And then it spoke again. This time it was Jay's voice. "Let me in, little boy. Let me in. Let me in." It slammed against the door and let out its horrific wail, that ungodly scream. Jay and L ran downstairs looking as shocked and horrified as I did. The voice demanded to be let in again, in L's voice now. "Jay, open the door, please. That's not me in there with you." Then it spoke in my voice.
"I want to have some fun too."
I think I may have hyperventilated, because everything went black after that. When I came to, it was morning. Jay and L were standing over me. They'd already packed up, and we were all ready to get the hell out of there. We drove, and the mountains grew distant behind us, soon fading away as we made it home. This time around, I didn't mind being the driver this time. L and Jay refused to return there, but one day I think I will. I think I'll go back to Clemson County. I love the woods and mountains. I love the nature itself, and I don't think the evil that lurks there can deter me. But I hope that when I do go back to Clemson County, it goes well for me. I'd rather come out of it alive again. Here's to hoping. Creature in Hangman's Field, from DOC. My dad is a big hunter. My brother and I tag along on trips and trail surveys often. It's usually fun because we spend all day in the woods on our ATVs. One day we decided to stop and look at a spot deep in the woods. These were the Pine Barrens, and it was already dark, so I was starting to get uncomfortable. This was a spot I was familiar with, because we go through these trails a lot. It's called Hangman's Field, because of a story of a man who hung himself on a tree here, above an old well. The well is still there, and gives off a terrifying vibe. But this area is one big, scary trip. There's virtually no life, no signs of squirrels, deer, or plants, just dead vegetation and still air. There's a giant, lonesome, dead tree that is snapped in half and hangs unnaturally. My point is, the whole place isn't somewhere you want to go to feel good. We stopped and opened up the cooler to get a drink as my dad looked around, trying to get a signal on his cell phone so we could find our way back through the woods. Out of nowhere, we hear a loud and heavy animal running through the field. The noise was prominent. There were no other sources of sounds around us. This creature was circling us. We turned on all the headlights on the ATVs in an effort to see it or scare it off. And we did see it, and we knew then that trying to scare it off would be impossible. It was no less than 7 feet tall, lumbering but quick. We could hear its breathing whenever it stopped running. This thing was a monster. It gave off a blood-curdling screech that made us cringe and shiver. It had skin like tree bark, with limbs that meandered like a dead tree. You would mistake it for a tree if you didn't know any better, or if you didn't look close enough. But having seen it run and hear it screeching at us, we knew it was something otherworldly. We quickly decided to get the hell out of there and followed the trail all the way back until we hit the power lines, which meant we were close to the truck. We loaded the ATVs faster than ever and hopped in. We were familiar with stories about the Pine Barrens before this happened, but we never thought we'd see something like this. If you're ever out at Hangman's Field, it's too late, and you've made a dire mistake. Something below my tree stand, from That Fat Canadian. I'm a native Canadian living on 30 acres of land, owned by my dad. On our land, we have horses, sheep, cattle, and 4 husky Rottweiler mixes. Quite an intimidating breed of dog. Anyway, out here I love hunting, and I've had my eye on this prime buck. 13 points, grayish-white pelt. I've caught him on my trail cam about 10 times now. He's had plenty of time to start a family, so it's time for him to be claimed by me. One day I take one of the horses, Magic, looking for the trail of Frost, which is what I named the big buck. I tie him up at the start of the trail, and I make my way to my tree stand. According to the cameras, this was the most recent trail that he was on, and it happened to be the most common trail he was seen at. So I was feeling lucky. Sure enough, after waiting about 2 hours in my tree stand, I saw a huge buck in the nearby field, and I knew it was him. I take aim through the scope, careful about being quiet and precise. This may be my only chance. The huge buck and doe that's with him are both spooked and run into the tree line. I curse under my breath, then look back in the scope, searching for what may have done that, when suddenly I hear a snap from a twig or branch below me. Instinctively, I look away from the scope and peer down, and I can't breathe. A few feet under me is the most bizarre-looking creature I'd ever seen. It had the face like a dog, but stood tall. I'd say 6.5 to 7 feet tall, to be exact. It was staring into the clearing where the deer just were. Obviously, I wasn't the only one hunting them. I realized then that this creature stank to high heaven. I also realized that I was downwind, and something that stank that bad would have quickly been noticed by those deer. I held my breath, and I waited ages for the thing to leave. I must have done a dang good job covering up my scent that morning, because it failed to notice me, but I continued to hold my breath as long as possible. When I did breathe, I would do it slowly. If I'd have made a sound, I don't think I'd be alive today. I thought about shooting it, but I wasn't sure how many bullets would do the trick, and reloading this thing would take too long. After about 20 minutes, the thing finally started to move. Unluckily for me, it was moving in the direction where I'd left my horse. I slowly climbed down when the coast was clear, and I prayed that it didn't hurt Magic. The walk back to Magic was the longest walk of my life, both because I was terrified and because I was walking at about 2 miles per hour, if not slower. As soon as the smell of the thing began to dissipate, I began to smile. I walked faster until I began to run, and I climbed aboard Magic, who was perfectly fine, thank God. Then the two of us got out of there. After seeing this creature, it didn't stop me from hunting there, but it definitely made me more cautious. There's no telling what it was, but if it comes close to my house and threatens magic and the livestock, I'm ready to face off with it. Treasure hunting turned nightmare. From Aaron. By the way, this is a different kind of hunting story, but I hope you like it. I woke up one Saturday morning to my friend Jamie calling me, asking me if I wanted to go on a treasure hunt with his metal detector in the woods. I agreed because it sounded interesting, and it was a warm sunny day in Warrington, England. At around 10:30, we met at our local subway in Stockton Heath to grab a sub before heading out to the forest. My friend Samuel looked on edge as we made it out there. He'd never really liked nature. The woods freaked him out for as long as I'd known him. I reminded him, as I always did, that there was nothing to be afraid of out here. But that day, I was about to be proved wrong. Jamie could not wait to use his metal detector, and as soon as he could, he had it out and was scanning the ground a little too quickly. I told him to slow down or it wasn't going to pick anything up, but he didn't listen. Jamie was the type to get very excitable. We must have spent several hours out here, but we didn't find anything. Jamie was entirely disappointed, and I had regretted saying yes to this, as I expected us to find something. Maybe an old broken pair of glasses at the very least, or an old coin. Even an empty can would have been fun. But we literally found nothing. Samuel, who had been ready to head back at the first minute, was getting excited himself because he knew it was time to go home. As we were walking back on the trail, we all froze for a moment, because, of all people, Samuel stopped us and pointed ahead on the trail. Guys, do you see that? His finger led to what appeared to be some bushes. See what, dude? That. The big clump of stuff on the right side of the trail, he said. I don't see anything, man. It looks like some bushes to me. Yeah, Samuel said. But they weren't there before. That's what I'm saying. Man, you're just seeing things. I'm telling you, it's just... And then the bushes started to move. What appeared to be a thicket of leaves now looked to be hair, curly and gross. This bush got taller until it stood about 8 feet tall, and we realized that what we were looking at was not plants at all, but a large and mysterious hairy creature. It walked across the trail and disappeared on the other side, leaving us dumbfounded and horrified. As soon as its footsteps died down, we ran back home. After this experience, our little friend group has not gone back into those woods. And these days, I often take second glances at thickets and bushes, because apparently, sometimes they can be something else. You can go in prepared, you can be hidden, you can even be heavily armed, but none of this means you're actually ready for what's in those woods. Even hunters, people who are used to the eerie silence of the forest, can easily become victims to the weird creatures that exist within the trees. So be careful and make sure you're quick to pull that trigger. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. To support the show, click the links below. There's a link to my Patreon and a link to my merch store. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode about 5 Pine Barrens horror stories. Colton Talks a Lot says, I got a Jersey Devil in my pantaloons, if you know what I'm saying. There's a mythical demon creature in your pantaloons? Dang, that must suck. Coleman Huff says, right place, right time. You've been keeping me company at work for years. Thanks, Darkness. Well, thank you for loyally tuning in all this time, Coleman, and I'm glad I could help. Bon Dinkley says, "Great video as always. Any chance of some new pizza delivery stories?" Probably. I love pizza, and I love scary stories, and combining the two turns them into something quite amazing. The Forlorn Bat says, "I have a friend who used to live in New Jersey. I think he might be one of those cryptids. Does he wear a wife beater made out of leather? Then probably yes." And Shannon R says, "The title of the first story already sent shivers down my spine." I can't remember the first story's title, but if you're serious, I feel ya. A lot of the time, the story gets me just because the title sounds juicy. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, because more scary stories are coming soon. It is Halloween after all. Or it soon will be. Anyway, here are the credits to my supernaturally talented patrons. They're awesome. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.